If we can bring them back to life, why don't we? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, I heard an interesting story on National Public Radio today. I would assume the most popular radio station among our members at BillWhittle.com. And they
All
were
things considered.
Actually, I didn't listen long enough to hear the story, but they were promoting the story, and it got me to thinking. They said that science is almost on the verge, or perhaps actually able right now, to bring back to life extinct species, to essentially reanimate them from DNA fragments that we're able to pick up in the fossil record and elsewhere. And it occurred to me immediately that anytime you have a new capability in society, it makes a couple of questions come to the surface. For example, number one is, wouldn't that be great? I mean, everybody thinks in terms of like Jurassic Park, but, you know, really, I'm thinking of our friends on the left who miss all the snail darters and the various species of turtle and owl that have been driven to the extinction by essentially suburban development and prosperity. Bill, isn't this a way to kind of solve that argument?
I know for a certain fact that there's some place, and it's actually a very cool building, and it's in a very cool place. It looks like Dr. Evil's lair, and it's in the mountains of Norway or something like that. I mean, it's out in the middle of nowhere. And they basically have a collection of all of the seeds of all of the plants in the world. I'm sure that there are DNA samples for just about every living species. The problem with that, Scott, is not getting enough of a sample for one person. The problem is getting enough of a sample to breed a species out. If you save one animal's DNA and then you clone another animal, or let's say you just clone that animal and then that animal, you clone two animals and they have kids, same DNA. Now you've got the kind of situation where it's mom and dad are producing children, and the children mate with each other, and you end up with deliverance. So
Not the spiritual kind, the movie.
No, the movie,
yes.
The movie kind. So there's a lot of issues with that. But in terms of bringing back individual species, my understanding is that rather than just having a mammoth, they bring back enough of the DNA, implant an egg into an elephant. The elephant gives birth to a 60% mammoth, and they over generations can kind of breed it out. Put that aside for a second. Yes, it'd be fantastic. It really would be to be able to bring back extinct species and bring them back in such a way that we would be able to populate the certain islands with them. And I'm not talking so much about dinosaurs. It'd just be nice. I think it'd be cool to see the Tasmanian tiger again. And on some level, at the very least, it should be able to calm some of our anxiety about disappearing species. Now, with all of that said, when we talk about bringing back species, we talk about things like the woolly mammoth and maybe the saber-toothed tiger or the giant ground sloth, the last of which was hunted into extinction rather, by the noble Indians who used every scrap of everything and lived off the land. It killed every last one of them. But we don't talk about bringing back a species of rat that may have existed in the 1400s that helped spread the bubonic plague, and I'm sure there are any number of insect variations that we're not particularly happy to see again. I don't find it particularly dangerous because we do get to select what we recover, and if we start recovering microbes and insects, that's a big mistake. But having those species come back is cool. But the bigger issue, the one you're talking about, really is the political issue.
Well, let me ask you a specific question
Sure.
about that, too, because what you just said is it would be cool if we could do this. And the question immediately arises, who is we? In other words, who is the regulating body that decides who gets to use this technology, which species get to be revivified? How do you regulate that? I'm assuming that you would want the United Nations in charge of such a thing.
You took the words right out of my mouth. If you're going to be dealing with something that is that important for the history of the world, I think the only place where you can safely trust the scientists to do the right thing is with the United Nations.
Like an intergovernmental panel of some sort.
On climate change, yeah. That's exactly what you stole the joke right out of my mouth. Yeah, I'd give it to the International Panel on Climate Change, and they certainly know what to do because they're scientists and there's a consensus. So, but here's the bigger issue. It seems increasingly clear to me that the politicians in Sacramento have been for quite a while now, and this is going to accelerate enormously under Gavin Newsom, have decided to choke out the farmers that live in the Central Valley of California, where a significant amount of the country and the world's agriculture is grown. And they're doing it by choking off the water. Now, if you look at the Central Valley on a map in terms of how it voted, California is actually a red state by far in terms of area. It's L.A. and San Francisco and so on that swing it over. But the middle of the state is just completely blood red. And I've heard enough argument to become a believer in the fact that the blues in Sacramento are doing everything they can to decimate the farming communities in the center of the state. And they do that by choking off the water. And the way they choke off the water is to invoke the Delta smelt, which is a species of fish about the size of a sardine that it lives in a certain habitat. And if farmers get enough water to grow, crops to feed humans, then that's going to be the end of the Delta smelt. Therefore, we're going to destroy these dams and we're going to make sure that you don't get any water and you're going to leave. And I think there's a political reason for that. But as many people have pointed out, I want to say Glenn Reynolds mostly. I mean, we don't have, cows are not in any danger of extinction. And neither are pigs, and neither are dogs and cats, and neither, well, let's leave dogs and cats out for the sake of this argument. In other words, animals that we find delicious, we have more of them than we know what to do with. So you could make a very compelling case to say that if the Delta smelt was good on a kind of a specialty California pizza, we'd be breeding Delta smelts by the billions, and this problem as a problem would go away. Obviously, while that may be a little bit facetious, the fact of the matter is that it's not the extinction of the species that is the issue. We could put Delta smelts into enormous ponds and breed them like we breed trout or other fish food and have billions of them. So it's something else is going on. And what's going on is the left is using the tactic that becomes every day increasingly clearer to me. They use the decency and the compassion of the American people against them in order to get their political agenda across. And in this case, they're saying we don't want the species to go extinct. And anybody with a conscience feels like, oh, well, yeah, that's bad. We've been hearing about all these extinctions that we've caused as human beings. Is it 97% or something of all the species that ever lived on the earth lived here before humans arrived and went out on their own. And
one of our members at BillWhittle.com, the new beta version of the website,
which is getting great reviews thanks to Mr. Scott Ott.
There is a blog, a member blog that members can post on at that site. And one of our members posted, embedded a YouTube video of a George Carlin routine where he goes through exactly what you're talking about
it's there.
Great.
And he did it 25 years ago.
Yeah,
he basically said the Earth doesn't have to worry about us. And that when humanity is gone, it may turn out that the reason that humanity evolved in the first place was because the Earth needed plastic.
The Earth wanted plastic, that's right.
Yeah.
But let me ask you, kind of wind it up with a final question here. The reality is, Bill, if this technology can be successful to be able to use the DNA of long dead creatures to essentially replace extinct species on the face of the Earth, then it will happen. And so because it can happen, therefore it will happen. Therefore, what's the conservative position on how that should be regulated? Because it affects us all. It's a commons issue, isn't it?
It certainly could be. There has long in science fiction been this fear, and I think it's an interesting and warranted fear, that with nanotechnology, the ability to make machines that function on a human cellular level, they could go in and just destroy cancer cells, for example. But if they got out of control, they could basically snip the bonds on molecules and turn the entire world into just gray soup. And I don't want to see that. So as far as I'm concerned, and I think this is a statement that I could stand on, if you're talking about dealing with biological life forms and doing this kind of thing, as long as you're talking about a big life form like a mammoth or anything bigger than a rat or a cat or something like that, you're dealing with a fairly decent sized life form. There's very little danger involved. It's when you start getting into microbes and smaller creatures that can get out of the lab and start to multiply and so on.
And that's exactly where they'll start.
Yes. Well, I'm not too worried about giant ground sloth park. That doesn't particularly scare me. It's not one of the things that keeps me awake at night. If they were to return the North American ground sloth, which is the size of a grizzly bear, that'd be interesting and fun. But the technology will be employed, you're right, and I'd like to see it employed the way that other technologies seem to be best employed, through a series of private corporations, and the smaller the better, who have this technology and are doing it for tourism, or whatever the case may be. A much more interesting question, I think, is if you have this technology and you apply it to humans, the ability to slow down aging or reverse aging, who gets it? Should they get it? And if so, what happens? If you want to talk about, since we're talking about bringing creatures back from the dead, if you think there's a hatred and animosity now for people who have become wealthy through their own hard work, just wait till we get to the days where it turns out that that's going to give you another 30, 40, 50, 100 years of life. Then you've got moral issues that I think dwarf this species recovery technology.
Well, I, for one, will be living an extra 30 or 40 years in a walled compound surrounded by ferocious giant ground sloths that'll be defending my life.
Well, you'll have a spear, Scott. We're not, we're cruel, but we're fair.
That's right.
And we will give you the means to defend yourself against the violent lightning attacks produced by giant ground sloths.
5 days a week, we dip into the new and the ancient here at BillWhittle.com, and we bring conservative principles back to life on a daily basis. We appreciate the members at BillWhittle.com who make this show possible through their contributions on a monthly basis, anywhere from $10 a month to $50 a month. We invite you to become one of them. Just go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this happen.